Every single year, on the exact same day of the week, a priest in Jerusalem would walk out to a field, cut a single sheaf of the very first barley to ripen that season, and carry it into the temple. He would wave it before Yahweh, not sacrifice it, wave it, lift it up, and move it, as a sign that this harvest now belonged to him before anyone was allowed to eat a single bite of the new grain. And there was one very specific detail about which day this had to happen. Leviticus 23:11. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave the sheaf, not any day the priest chose. The day after the Sabbath, every single year, and on one particular morning, on that exact day, in that exact city, something else happened that had never happened before. Welcome back. This is the next video in our feast series. We've walked through Passover and unleavened bread. Today, the feast that falls right in the middle of that same week, and the day it lands on is not a coincidence. Let's look at what's commanded. Leviticus 23:9 through 14. When you come into the land which I give to you and reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh to be accepted on your behalf. And you shall offer, along with it, a male lamb without blemish as a burnt offering to Yahweh with its grain offering and drink offering. And then this line, you shall eat neither bread nor parched grain nor fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your God. Nobody touches the new harvest, not a piece of bread, not a handful of grain, until the first fruits have been formally presented and accepted. The first portion goes to Yahweh before anyone else gets to benefit from what grew. Now, that phrase, the day after the Sabbath, has been read two different ways for a very long time, and it's worth understanding both because the disagreement itself is old. One reading takes Sabbath here to mean the first day of unleavened bread, the feast's own commanded rest, regardless of what day of the week it falls on. Under that reading, first fruits could land on any day of the week, depending on the year. The other reading takes Sabbath at its plainest meaning, the regular seventh day. Under that reading, first fruits always falls on the same day every single year, the first day of the week, the day after the weekly Sabbath. This was an actual dispute between different groups in ancient Israel, not a modern invention. And it matters here because of what all four Gospels independently report. Matthew 28:1. Now after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. Mark 16:2. Very early in the morning, on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. Luke 24:1. Now, on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came to the tomb bringing the spices which they had prepared. John 21. Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early while it was still dark. Four different Gospels, four different authors, every single one marking the same detail. The first day of the week, the day after the Sabbath, the exact day the priest was already commanded to walk out, cut the first sheaf of the harvest, and wave it before Yahweh so that everything that came after it could be brought in. Paul saw this immediately, writing to the church in Corinth, the same church we spent an entire episode on in this channel's Paul series, 1 Corinthians 15:20. But now Christ is risen from the dead and has become the firstfruits of those who have fallen asleep. 1 Corinthians 15:23. But each one in his own order, Christ the first fruits, afterward those who are Christ's at his coming, first fruits. Not a metaphor Paul invented on the spot, a specific commanded ceremony on a specific commanded day that Paul's readers already knew by heart. There's a phrase Paul uses just a few verses earlier, worth pausing on, 1 Corinthians 15:4. He was buried and he rose again the third day, according to the scriptures. According to the scriptures. Paul is pointing back to something already written centuries before, Hosea 6:2. After 2 days, he will revive us. On the third day, he will raise us up, that we may live in his sight. The third day wasn't a detail added afterward to make the story feel more meaningful. It was already sitting in the prophets, waiting. The wave sheaf was never the whole harvest. It was the first cutting, waved before Yahweh as proof the rest was coming, and coming safely. And there's a detail most people never connect to this feast at all, Matthew 27:52 and 53. The graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and coming out of the graves after his resurrection, They went into the holy city and appeared to many after his resurrection, not before. Others raised following right behind the first sheaf, exactly the way Paul describes it: first fruits, then the harvest, each in his own order. There's one more detail that fits this pattern almost too precisely to be accidental. John 20:17, Mary Magdalene finds the risen Jesus in the garden and reaches for him, and he stops her. Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father, not yet ascended, as if there was a step that had to happen first before he could be held. Think about what the wave sheaf actually was. It wasn't handled by the people first, it was cut and immediately brought before Yahweh, presented, and only after that presentation could anyone else benefit from the harvest. Jesus tells Mary not to touch him because he has not yet ascended, not yet presented himself to the Father, and yet only a short time later, in Matthew 28:9, when he meets another group of women on the road, they take hold of his feet and worship him. Something changed in between those two moments. I won't claim certainty about exactly what happened in that gap, but the pattern is hard to miss. The wave sheaf presented first before anyone else could touch what it represented, and a resurrected Messiah on this exact feast day telling someone not to touch him yet for what sounds like the very same reason. Now, let's be plain about what's actually commanded here and where it's honestly a little different from Passover and unleavened bread. Bring a sheaf of the first harvest to the priest. Wave it before Yahweh alongside a lamb, a grain offering, and a drink offering. Don't eat any of the new harvest until that's done. A statute forever throughout your generations. This one was built around a functioning priesthood and a temple because it's tied to the actual harvest and the actual altar. In a way, eating a meal at home isn't. Without a temple standing, the ceremony as originally given can't be carried out exactly as written, and I want to say that plainly rather than pretend otherwise. What continues either way is the count Yahweh attaches to this day, Leviticus 23:15 and 16. You shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be completed. Count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath, then you shall offer a new grain offering to Yahweh. 50 days counted from this exact morning, landing on the next feast on the calendar. That count doesn't require a temple, it just requires paying attention starting on the same day the wave sheaf was lifted, the same day the tomb was found empty. Here's what I want you to walk away with. Every single year before this feast, a priest cut the first of the harvest and lifted it up so that everyone would know the rest was coming. On one particular first day of the week, the actual first fruits of everyone who has ever trusted Yahweh walked out of a tomb, and the rest of that harvest is still being gathered in. If this connected something for you today, subscribe and leave a comment. Tell me what stood out most: the wave sheaf itself, the 4 Gospels agreeing on the same day, or the saints raised after him. Next in this series, we follow the count. This feast starts 50 days, ending at weeks, the feast where Torah was given at Sinai and where something else was given in the very same city on the very same day, centuries later.